The paper is thin. It feels fragile, almost weightless. Yet in Manuelito's calloused hands, it carries the mass of a dying star. It sits on the laminate kitchen table, bathed in the hum of a flickering fluorescent bulb. Numbers, 7 of them, aligned in a sequence that defied every law of probability he had ever known. Outside the sounds of the neighborhood, distant sirens, a neighbor's barking dog, continue as they always have, but inside this room, the air has turned to glass. He doesn't cheer. He doesn't call his wife from the next room. He doesn't fall to his knees in gratitude. Instead, Manuelito feels a cold, creeping dread. It's the kind of fear that comes when you realize you've stepped into a spotlight you've spent 26 years trying to avoid. To the rest of the world, this is a ticket to a new life. To Manuelito, it is a beacon, a flare shot into a dark sky, screaming for the authorities to look down and finally see the man who isn't supposed to be here. He stares at the ticket until the numbers blur. He thinks of the millions of dollars waiting in a vault somewhere, a mountain of gold that could buy safety, dignity, and a future for his children. Then he thinks of the border. He thinks of the handcuffs. He asks himself the one question that will eventually become his undoing. Can I even claim this? In that moment, the win begins to feel like a trap. The greatest luck of his life has just handed him a death sentence for his anonymity. In the year 2000, Tijuana was a blur of dust and desperation. Manuelito was 16 when he crossed, a boy with nothing but a set of sturdy shoulders and a quiet resolve to disappear into the machinery of the American dream. He didn't come to be a ghost, but he became one anyway. For nearly 3 decades, he moved through the world like a shadow. He worked the construction sites where the heat turned the air into a furnace. He pulled double shifts in the cold, metallic clang of the factories. He paid his taxes with an ITIN, contributed to a system that didn't recognize his name, and kept his head down. He married a woman who saw the man behind the silence. They had 2 kids, American kids who spoke English with the local cadence and viewed the world with an optimism Manuelito never dared to touch. His life was a masterpiece of careful navigation. He avoided the checkpoints, stayed away from the protest, and never so much as got a speeding ticket. His home was a sanctuary, built on the shifting sands of an unresolved immigration status. But by 2026, the air had changed. The political climate had sharpened into a blade. Enforcement wasn't just a news headline anymore, it was the black SUV at the end of the block, the neighbor who stopped making eye contact, the tightening knot in his stomach every time he saw a uniform. He lived in a state of high-functioning panic. Every knock on the door was a potential ending. Every siren was a countdown. He was a man who had built a kingdom on a foundation he didn't own, waiting for the wind to blow it all away. Then came the ticket. The $2 gamble that was supposed to be a joke, a fleeting moment of what if, suddenly became the only thing more dangerous than his past, his future. Isolation is the scammer's greatest ally. Manuelito couldn't go to the state lottery office. He knew the forms would ask for a social security number he didn't have. He couldn't go to his regular bank. He was trapped in a financial purgatory. So he did what the desperate do. He looked for a side door. He spent nights in the blue light of his phone, searching for phrases like undocumented lottery winner and anonymous claim. That's when he found Julian Varga. Varga didn't look like a shark. His website was professional, polished with the muted blues and grays of a high-end law firm. He marketed himself as a specialist in complex asset recovery, with a specific niche in helping vulnerable populations navigate the legal system. In their first meeting, held in a quiet, upscale office that smelled of expensive leather and old books, Varga didn't lead with greed. He led with empathy. "I understand the fear, Manuelito," Varga said, leaning across the mahogany desk. His voice was a calm, steady baritone that acted like a sedative. "The system is designed to take from people like you, but the law has back doors. We use trusts. We use intermediaries. We create a legal shield so that the state sees a corporation, not a man without papers. You aren't just claiming a prize. You're protecting your family's existence." Varga spoke of discreet handling and precedent cases where he had helped others in the exact same position. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was a savior. For the first time in 20 years, Manuelito felt like he didn't have to hide. He felt seen, he felt safe. He handed his trust to a man who promised to bridge the gap between the shadow and the light. The transition from client to dependent happened in small, logical increments. Varga explained that for the shield to work, it had to be absolute. He presented a stack of papers. Standard representation agreements, he called them, filled with the dense, impenetrable thicket of legalese that Manuelito couldn't fully decipher. "It's all about layers," Varga insisted. "The more layers between you and the ticket, the safer you are from the authorities." Under Varga's direction, Manuelito signed documents to form a limited liability company. Then the most crucial step, the physical transfer of the ticket. "I need to take this to the secure vault in the capital," Varga said, his expression grave and professional. "If you carry it, you're a target. If I carry it as your legal counsel, it's protected by attorney-client privilege." Manuelito hesitated for a heartbeat, the small slip of paper feeling like his very soul. But the fear of being caught with it won out. He handed it over. Back at home, the atmosphere changed. The fear didn't vanish, but it was joined by a dizzying sense of hope. Manuelito and his wife began to whisper about the house they would buy. Not a mansion, just something with a yard and a title in their own names. They talked about college funds for the kids, about finally hiring a real immigration attorney to fix their status once the money was secured. Varga sent regular updates via encrypted messages. "The lottery board is reviewing the trust documents," one said. "Tax withholding is being calculated," said another. "The funds are being processed, almost there." The stakes were no longer just about the money. They were about the redemption of a lifetime of struggle. The first cracks appeared in the silence. Manuelito asked if he could attend the final meeting at the lottery headquarters, just to see the process. Varga's response was immediate and sharp. "Absolutely not. You'd be walking into a federal building with high-level security and mandatory identification checks. Do you want to risk a detainer for a photo op? Let me do my job." The logic was sound, but the tone was different. The empathy had started to evaporate, replaced by a cold, transactional distance. When Manuelito asked for copies of the processed documents, Varga sent over PDFs that were heavily redacted, citing security protocols to prevent wire fraud. The complexity of the paperwork began to feel less like a shield and more like a maze. One afternoon, Manuelito noticed an inconsistency. An email from the lottery liaison had a typo in the official seal, and the bank routing numbers on one of the escrow forms didn't match the previous month's update. He brought it up to Varga, his voice trembling with the effort of questioning an expert. Varga didn't explain. He pushed back. He reminded Manuelito of his status. He reminded him that without this specialized help, he was one traffic stop away from a deportation center in El Paso. "You're getting cold feet because you aren't used to having power," Varga told him. "Don't let your nerves ruin your children's lives." Manuelito retreated. He ignored the knot in his stomach. He told himself that he was just a simple man who didn't understand how the world of the wealthy worked. He chose to be blind because the alternative, that he was being hunted by his protector, was too terrifying to contemplate. By the third month, the processing had reached its final stage, or so Manuelito was told. The ticket was gone, locked away in a vault he couldn't access. The legal entity that owned the ticket was managed by Varga. The communications were all funneled through a single private server. Manuelito realized, with a jolt of vertigo, that he no longer had a single piece of evidence that he had ever held the winning numbers. He was locked in. If he tried to fire Varga, the lawyer held the ticket. If he went to the police, he'd have to explain how an undocumented man came into possession of millions of dollars, likely triggering an immediate investigation into his residency. He was a prisoner of his own fortune. One evening he sat in his small living room, watching his kids do their homework. They were laughing about something on their phones, completely unaware that their father had gambled their entire existence on a man he barely knew. Manuelito felt a sudden, violent urge to run to the office, to demand the ticket back, to burn the whole thing down just to feel some sense of control. But he stayed in his chair. The sunk cost wasn't just the $2 he spent on the ticket. It was the 26 years he had spent building a life in America. He couldn't risk the life he had for the life he was promised. But he had already crossed the point of no return. He was no longer the owner of his luck. He was its victim. The end didn't come with a bang. It came with a disconnected tone. For 3 days, Varga's phone went straight to voicemail. Manuelito drove to the mahogany-decked office, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. When he arrived, the gold lettering on the door was gone. The office was empty, save for a few discarded folders and the ghost of a leather scent. He rushed to a public library, his hands shaking so violently he could barely type. He searched the state lottery's official Winner's Circle page. There, posted 2 weeks prior, was a headline: Apex Heritage Trust claims $42 million jackpot. The blood drained from Manuelito's face. Apex Heritage Trust. That was the name of the entity Varga had him sign into existence. But as he scrolled down, he saw the names of the trustees. His name was nowhere to be found. The sole officer listed was Julian Varga. The money hadn't been processed for Manuelito. It had been harvested. Every signature Manuelito had provided, every standard agreement he had signed under the guise of protection, had been a calculated transfer of ownership. The lawyer hadn't found a loophole to help Manuelito claim the money. He had used Manuelito's fear to make the theft look like a voluntary gift. The money was gone. The lawyer was gone. And Manuelito was left standing in a quiet library, a man who didn't exist, mourning a fortune that was never legally his. Desperation drove Manuelito to do the one thing he feared most. He found a different lawyer, a real one, a pro bono advocate for migrant rights. He told the story in a frantic, broken stream of Spanish and English, expecting horror, expecting a plan for a lawsuit. But as the advocate reviewed the redacted documents Manuelito had managed to save, his face turned from sympathy to a grim, hollow realization. "Manuelito," the advocate said quietly, "Varga wasn't just a rogue scammer. Look at these signatures. Look at the notary stamps." He pointed to a name on the bottom of the trust incorporation. It was a name Manuelito recognized from the local news, a minor political figure with ties to the very agencies that oversaw immigration enforcement. This wasn't just a high-tech mugging, it was a factory. Varga was part of a predatory ecosystem that specifically tracked winning tickets sold in immigrant neighborhoods. They had people on the inside of the lottery commission who flagged certain wins, tickets that sat unclaimed for too long, or those purchased in zip codes with high undocumented populations. They didn't just steal the money, they used the law to sanitize the theft. Because Manuelito had signed the discretionary management agreement, he had legally granted Varga the right to allocate funds at the trustee's sole discretion. In the eyes of the law, Manuelito hadn't been robbed. He had made a very poor but entirely legal investment. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as intended for the people who owned it. The aftermath is a silent scream. There are no police reports, no headlines decrying the injustice. Manuelito returned to his life as a ghost, but now the haunting is worse. He still wakes up at 4 a.m. for the construction shifts. He still feels the vibration of the jackhammer in his bones, a brutal reminder of the physical labor he thought he had escaped. The financial loss is staggering, but the psychological toll is the true poison. He looks at his wife and sees the ghost of the house they almost owned. He looks at his children and sees the college degrees that have turned back into dreams. He lives in a state of permanent, vibrating paranoia. He knows that Varga and his associates have his full name, his address, and the proof of his status. They have the ultimate leverage. If he ever speaks up, if he ever tries to seek justice, all they have to do is make one phone call to ICE, and his family is torn apart. He is poorer now than he was before he won. Before he had the simple hope of the lucky. Now he has the heavy knowledge of the prey. He watches the news and sees stories of anonymous donors or new development projects funded by mysterious trusts. And he wonders if that's his money, the money that was supposed to buy his freedom, now being used to build the very walls designed to keep people like him out. He is a man who won the lottery and lost his soul in the transaction. Why did it work? It's a question that keeps Manuelito awake long after the rest of the city has gone to sleep. It worked because the scam wasn't built on greed. It was built on the architecture of exclusion. When a person is told for 26 years that they have no right to exist, they stop believing they have a right to justice. The specialist didn't need to be a master of disguise. He just needed to understand the mechanics of fear. He knew that for an undocumented person, the legal system is not a shield, but a meat grinder. By positioning himself as the only safe way to interact with that system, he created a monopoly on hope. This is the hidden tax of the undocumented. The vulnerability to predators who know their victims cannot cry for help. The scam worked because it utilized the victim's own survival instincts against him. Manuelito's desire to protect his family was the very string Varga used to tie the noose. In a society that creates a class of invisible people, a shadow economy of predators will always rise to harvest their labor, their dreams, and on the rarest of occasions, their luck. The lottery wasn't the prize, it was the bait. 3 years have passed since the numbers 04, 12, 29, 31, 40, 44 changed everything and nothing. Manuelito is on a bus, heading home from a 12-hour shift. His boots are caked in dried mud and his eyes are bloodshot from the dust of the sight. He passes a billboard for the latest Powerball jackpot, $200 million, and he doesn't even look up. He knows better now. His children are older. They are starting to ask why they never moved, why their father seems so tired, why he flinches every time a black car idles too long in front of the house. He doesn't tell them. To tell them would be to invite the danger back into the room. He carries the secret like a stone in his pocket, heavy and cold. Somewhere, perhaps only a few miles away in a gated community Manuelito will never enter, Julian Varga is pouring a glass of vintage wine. He is checking his watch, perhaps planning his next consultation for another lucky winner who is too afraid to be seen. He is living the life that Manuelito held in his hands for one fleeting week in the spring of 2026. The bus stops. Manuelito steps off into the familiar darkness of his neighborhood. He walks toward the small rented house with the peeling paint, the same house he's lived in since 2010. He reaches into his pocket for his keys, his fingers brushing against nothing but air and lint. He is a man who touched the sun and came back with nothing but burns. As he opens his door, he realizes the most terrifying truth of all. The system didn't fail him. It did exactly what it was designed to do. It reminded him that in this country, you can win the game and still lose your life.